Hello and welcome to this history tutorial on the reasons why poverty increased in Elizabethan England. This is for Edexcel GCSE History Elizabethan England. Today we will cover the problem of poverty and why it was a growing problem in Elizabeth's England. The first thing that we need to establish is what did poverty actually mean in Elizabethan England. Historians, when looking at that period, define it as spending more than 80% of your income on bread, being unemployed or not fit to work so that you were unable to provide for your family, being unable to afford the rising cost of food and needing financial help, poor relief, or charity to survive. In Elizabethan times, the number of people that fell into this category was rising, so we need to look at the reasons why. We are going to start by looking at some of the long-term reasons why poverty increased in Elizabethan England. One of the biggest things that led to an increase in poverty was the effects of a rising population, as this led to rising prices in Elizabethan England. During the 16th century, England's birth rate rose and the death rate fell, which led to huge population growth during Elizabeth's reign. The population went from around 3 million people to over 4 million. Food production did not keep pace with the population rise, and this meant that food prices went up as there was more demand for it, and as a result of this, there were sometimes food shortages. Food shortages were a particular problem in the 1550s and the 1560s because England suffered from a number of poor harvests. 1556 was the worst harvest for a century, and this took place just 2 years before Elizabeth became queen. These poor harvests meant that food prices rose even further, causing more suffering for the poorest in Elizabethan society. So the long-term problem of population growth, which led to a rise in prices, combined with the short-term problem of poor harvests, created a serious problem for the Elizabethan government, as poverty increased massively during this time. The rise in population also caused there to be greater competition for land, and so rents were increased because of this. Many tenant farmers lost their lands because they simply could not afford the increased rents, and as a result were forced into poverty. During this period, there were also a number of changes taking place in agriculture which had a devastating impact on poverty in Elizabethan England. In villages, people were beginning to move away from traditional agricultural methods, which involved farmers renting strips of land in large open fields. This kind of farming was very inefficient, and during Elizabeth's reign, landowners began changing their farming techniques to try and make farming more profitable. Instead of having open fields among many farmers, they enclosed these fields to make fewer but larger farms. Enclosure often led to small farms being merged together, and as a result tenant farmers were evicted. This led to a rise in unemployment, and many people moved from the countryside to the towns in order to try and find work. Another key change in agriculture which led to an increase in poverty was the increase in sheep farming that took place. In Elizabethan England, wool made up 80% of England's exports, so the wool industry was very profitable. As a result, many farmers moved to sheep farming as the demand for woolen cloth grew, and they did this in place of growing and selling grain. It was even the case that farmers began growing some crops in order to feed the sheep over winter, and did this instead of producing grain that would be used to feed people. This angered many, as large numbers of people were going hungry and couldn't afford bread. The change in focus to sheep farming and the resulting fall in grain production contributed to the rising cost of food. As well as this, sheep farming needed fewer labourers, which added to the problem of unemployment, and led to even more people moving from the countryside to the towns in order to find work. In summary, poverty was a growing problem in Elizabethan England due to a range of long-term and short-term factors. A growing population put a greater strain on demand for food, and food production did not keep pace with the population growth, leading to a rise in food prices. Population growth combined with the developments in agriculture made food prices a growing problem, as farmers began producing less grain in favour of sheep farming. If a poor harvest was added to these factors, then the problem of poverty became even more pronounced, as the cost of food rose even further, and the limited food available led many people going hungry. Many tenant farmers lost their land as enclosure became a new way of farming, and as a result unemployment rose and many left the countryside to go and find work in the towns. To get further help, visit history.outwood.com, see your teacher in school, or check out quiz.outwood.com for those sweet revision quizzes. You can also follow the Outwood Humanities team on Twitter @OGATHumanities. Until next time, that was a little bit of history.